Hello, all, and welcome. Last episode, I spoke with Dr. Guido Minaya on what practices larger companies employ to move the needle forward with respect to DE&I. Moving on, in this episode, I am joined with Susan Minaya, COO and Chief Learning Strategist at Minaya Learning Global Solutions. She'll be discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion through a training and development lens. Stay tuned to learn more. Hi, Susan. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, Dario.
So, what are drivers for diversity, equity, and inclusion training needs within an organization?
Well, that's really broad for sure.
Yeah.
But typically, DE&I is such a huge topic, right? And it really has a place in every organization, whether you're a small organization, a medium organization, or a large organization. And let's face it, DE&I is still something that organizations struggle with how to really get teeth with that from a training and development standpoint. How do we get our employees to really get this, embrace it, understand it? Because there's not a lot of vanguard type companies that are able to really showcase we're doing it well. It's moving a needle for us on a business level, and it is making an impact. So often, the need for DE&I training really begins to resonate first from things like employee engagement or cultural assessments that are done organizationally, where typically there's questions around inclusion and diversity, psychological safety, things like that that suggest specific cultural norms, maybe that obviously are creating a less than inclusive work environment.
Mm.
Sometimes it could be a result of organic actions too that are being taken within an organization. For example, like employees might be from an ethnic group particularly may want to gather and share common stories. They just come together for lunch or they meet infrequently, to start talking about how they're finding their experience in the workplace. It could be through, just discussions and dialogues around, common experiences that they're having in the workplace that can come in many different forms. Casual groups, I think Dr. Minaya talked earlier about ERGs and things like that. Those are more formalized, but organic ones are just people kind of moving together because they feel they're not being heard elsewhere. So they come together to kind of make that happen themselves, right? So that they feel like they have a common bond with others. And I think they create that safe space for themselves to really have discussions and dialogues around topics and experiences that are common to them within their workplace. And this can come in the form of book clubs. You've heard of things like lean-in groups. There could be the different ethnic groups that come together to share their professional experiences and support one another. But I think, also DE&I leadership has such a huge role to play, right? They really need to broadly understand the needs and impacts of these initiatives or the lack thereof within the organization. And they're going to see that in the results of the surveys.
Mm. Now, what is a good approach to DE&I training in an organization?
Well, I think you'll find if you read a lot of the surveys and the articles and the research studies that are being done right now, as I said, not a lot of companies are really hugely successful at it, and they're frustrated by it because they think they're doing the right thing. They're trying to do the right thing, and sometimes it depends on kind of how they're tackling it. But I think the biggest issue really comes is when they don't really understand their positioning statement as an organization around diversity, equity, and inclusion, because this has to start at the top from the CEO. And it does have to be top down in the organization to really have that commitment level tied to strategy, communicated clearly about why it's important to the business, why we want to really have this focus within our organization, and also set performance expectations of leaders, employees, and everyone to be able to help advance this culture, because this is about culture. And culture takes time to cultivate, which is another reason why people get frustrated, because it doesn't happen immediately. It takes time. It takes a long time. But, the tenacity pays off for sure in the long run. So it really does start at the top and have to flow down through the organization. But there's also bottom up things that can be done organizationally to also meet it. And training is one of those things. But training in and of itself, just to be out there and train for, say, inclusive leadership or just train for unconscious bias, it doesn't stick because it's not connected to anything, Does that make sense?
It does. And that was a lot of great points. And I'm happy you kind of paused there because in the future episodes we have coming up, it's definitely a topic that we're going to dive into a lot more deeply, which is, some of the roadblocks and challenges that organizations face when trying to implement diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. And I also like one of the points you made that, culture takes time to cultivate and they're not seeing immediate results because obviously it takes time. I think in a prior episode, Dr. Minaya said it can take anywhere from up to as long as 10 years from the beginning of an initiative to see the results of that initiative and the actual impact that it's made within the organization. So that's wonderful.
Definitely so.
Can you give me an example of something you've seen that has worked well?
So, sure, I can give you an example of how DE&I training can evolve organically and become really a core DE&I initiative. So, even if there's not a well crafted DE&I strategy within the organization, okay?
Mm,
So, in this event, it's a women in leadership program and a curriculum. It really was organic, and there was a lot of leader led gatherings around women in leadership that suggested that, there was that awareness of women leaders within the organization that they weren't really rising up to the top, right? They had this kind of stall out at kind of the mid manager level, and they weren't seeing as many women leaders moving up into the executive ranks of the organization. And so they would gather to kind of talk about what's the barrier there or how come this isn't like advancing more. And if you think about it, that's on the employee side. But then on the organizational side, there's a real concern of retention and succession planning, right? And pipeline development for succession planning. And in this particular organization, women were a very large part of the population, yet underrepresented at the executive level positions. So, without a formal DE&I leader at the time, they really recognized the sentiment of the internal women leaders, and the CHRO really identified the need to have that focus as something that was really needed within the organization. It was like the time is now, and we needed to go ahead and solve for that in very like impactful way that solve for key things such as employee engagement, the retention, and the development of an executive leadership pipeline.
mm,
So, by addressing the whole realm of leadership, strategic, personal, professional, psychological was really important, and it was contextualized for women leaders specifically. So, you know, um, it was sort of funny because it's like it is contextualized for women leaders, but sometimes when you look at it, if you take that component of it out, it could be really a leadership development program for leaders in general, so
mhm,
it was really being able to take the unique experiences of women leaders and trying to rise up in an organization or become leaders in a latticed way across the organization, that it really focused on. But it really did take a very holistic approach about the leader, and again, it also took a business and operational and a strategic lens as well for them so they could really understand how they're showing up.
And what was some of the structure of that program, or what are the things that were experienced through that program?
Yeah, so it was a 12-month program, so
Okay.
there was a lot of commitment for
Yeah.
people, and 6 of those months were actually on the formation of a professional development plan
Hmm.
that they did that kick it off, and an assessment that was done. There was 6 months of educational programming. They had readings and homework. And then, really, the last 6 months of the program were really applied learning, where they actually took the things that they learned in the program and they applied it to organizational projects that were challenges or opportunities in the organization. Um, and it gave them an opportunity to actually showcase their capabilities, the things that they learned. So it was very exciting for the participants in the cohort because they were able to present in front of the C suite the impact that they had made with their projects on the organization. So that was very gratifying for them, but it also showcased them as well.
Wow, that's an amazing piece right there. I want to say, having already applied learning to situations within the organization that they could present to the C-suite, not only showcasing themselves and their abilities and everything that they've learned, but also addressing an issue within the organization. So feeding back into the organization right away.
Yeah, definitely so. Because, training isn't effective if you're not going to leverage it and use it. So
Mm,
it was really designed to make that happen. And I think, too, another really important component was the individual and group coaching that took place throughout the entire 12-month program. So they all had coaches, executive coaches that they got to work with, and also in a individual capacity as it related to their individual development plans. But then they also met in small groups with the coaches, so to help build their network and also their professional contacts and with other and relationships with other women leaders in the organization. So, again, like I told you, without that contextualization of women leaders, and what are the unique things that they have, oftentimes you'll hear like imposter syndrome. There's still things talking about being a resilient leader. A lot of times in women in leadership curricula, you'll see things around communication and how you're communicating. Those can be challenges and barriers, and there may be biases around that from other people within the organization. So those are typical topical things that are in there. um,
So with that, so the program you just kind of described, amazing program. It sounds like, was that the initial program, like the first time that that program was run, or has this been ongoing for a while now?
well, it was the first time. Now it's in the second cohort, so which actually doubled in size, which was amazing. So
Wow.
kind of word got out about the program and the intensity of it. It's a lot when you're in the program, because it demands a lot of the leaders that are in there, because they are leaders. They're at more of the VP level, system director level, executive director level, that are actually in the program, but they also have really big jobs, and they have to be doing this curriculum for 6 months out of that, which was taking place like every couple of weeks, right? That they
Yeah,
would
while
have for
balancing their
half hour,
actual work stuff that
half
they need to do.
days,
Yeah.
right? So it was a real commitment on their part.
I can even imagine even the latter 6 months as well when you do the applied learning, um, having time and attention to focus on details for that type of a project while still doing your actual work as well. I can understand
Hmm.
that that would also be a little conflicting and sometimes very grueling for the
Yeah, for sure.
participants. So,
Well, you try to encourage them because it had a lot of criteria. So it couldn't
mhm.
just be a project. I mean, there was criteria for it. You had to be able
Yeah,
to scope it, you had to be able to complete it, and be able to evaluate it within a 6 month period of time, essentially, to do. But the good thing about it, they were able to partner with other people in their cohort. So oftentimes these would be cross departmental connections so they're building relationship that way. And so that was really
yeah.
amazing as
Connecting
well.
people across the
Hmm.
organization that otherwise normally they might not correspond with or engage with, or maybe just an email or two, but that's about it. No face to a name. So
Absolutely.
that's nice. I feel like that's also very beneficial, somewhat kind of bringing the organization closer through that aspect a little bit. So that's
Yeah.
nice.
And I think the program is really integrated and aligned with the organizational strategy. And I think that that is really a core component of it. So, every component of the program is linked to the learning, coaching, assessment, the project, the organizational strategies. There's a lot of connective tissue in this. And I think that that's why it is as successful as it is.
That's great. Now, for the program you mentioned, that doesn't necessarily seem like an off the shelf type training and development scenario. That definitely sounds like something that is more personalized and a little bit more custom tailored to the organization that utilized it. I feel like, of course, there are benefits to off the shelf training that you find for DEI, which I've
Sure.
seen a lot of. But as you've mentioned earlier in this episode, and things we'll talk about in the future, there are some conflicts with maintaining those initiatives and seeing progress with those initiatives within organizations. So, where's the difference with that as far as off the shelf content and something that's custom or personalized for an organization?
Well, I think it's a both, this and both, right? So I think you can leverage that, because not every organization has the resources to be able to custom design everything,
Hmm.
or have the funding to outsource it to get it done. So
Or
you
maybe
could,
just not know where to start
or not
potentially.
even
Yeah.
know where to start. So there's many organizations that have off the shelf DE&I curricula. I think that's great. But and there's some super programs out there. So it doesn't require an overarching DE&I strategy, but I think to be effective with the training, but it does require analysis and some level of understanding about key pain points in the organization that need addressing, and really should be foundational components of what will hopefully someday be part of a more formalized and broader DE&I initiative. So, just plopping stuff against the wall for people, is great, but like, what's the why of what we're doing, and why is it important? And why should I care or want to do it, right? So if you
Mm-hmm.
have disparate courses, it's okay, but so like how do you tie it all together? So as you know, my thing is strategy, right? So when I do learning strategies, this would be a perfect example of a DE&I learning strategy, right? You have an overarching organizational DE&I strategy that's very broad base for the organization, but
Mm-hmm.
a learning strategy around this would be especially important to kind of make sure that you're hitting the different levels within the organization. It's aligning to strategy. It's aligning to why it's important to us
Mm-hmm.
as an organization. So those are just really important things to do. So I really believe that any off the shelf still needs organizational context and alignment for that stickiness factor.
Yeah.
Because without that, it's just an event that doesn't move the DE&I needle in an organization.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much, Susan, for talking about DE&I through a training and development lens, and especially for that project example, essentially with women in leadership.
Sure. Thank you, Dario.
In our next episode, we'll be shifting our lens to the external from the internal and looking at supplier diversity. Until next time.